Welcome to Legislative Report. I'm Anthony Tezak. Is state spending going to grow by an astounding 16%? And are your taxes going to go up? Are our school districts going to receive more money? It's budget season at the Capitol, and those questions and more are swirling around Harrisburg. Here to answer them and to explain the latest on the budget process and education funding is State Representative Ryan Mackenzie. Representative Mackenzie, welcome.
Anthony, thank you for having me. It is an interesting time of year here in Harrisburg, so I'm glad we get together and discuss these issues.
As of the day of this taping, we are less than a week, a few days left until the end of the fiscal year. Where is the budget as it stands now, and are we going to have an on-time budget this year?
Sure. So we've worked through a process. It spans a number of months here in Harrisburg, whereby we start with the governor introducing a budget. And this year, that happened in March and April, that time frame, where he laid out his budget. Then we go through a process in the House and the Senate. We have appropriations hearings. On the governor's budget, we interview cabinet members and individuals within his departments and agencies across state government who share their vision, the governor's vision, for what state government should look like. And after that process concludes, then we in the House and Senate begin the actual legislative process of the budget, whereby we put together our budget proposals. And now we're in June, and so we have been discussing and debating bills that go along with the state budget. So the state budget is never a single piece of legislation. There are many pieces of legislation that go along with that. There are individual bills which deal with the funding of some of our state-related universities, bills which relate to the education code, the welfare code, our tax code, and then also the main part of the budget is the appropriations bill, which actually spends the money for state government every year. So we're discussing and debating all of those different pieces of legislation now, and I am confident that by June 30th, it's our constitutionally mandated deadline, we will pass a piece of legislation and all of those legislative pieces that go along with the budget, get them to the governor's desk. We'll have a balanced budget. Again, it'll be passed on time. It'll focus on our responsibilities, things like education, strengthening and protecting taxpayers, reforming government, and helping those who are most vulnerable in our communities and those who are in need. And so I think we're going to be able to focus on our priorities like that, get that budget passed on time, and then it's really going to be up to the governor whether or not he signs that budget. And I really hope he does, because I've talked to many service organizations in our community that rely on funding from the state government. And if we pass a budget that meets all of those obligations and the governor does not pass it, it's on him that those organizations aren't going to be receiving the funding, and those organizations are going to either have to stop providing services to vulnerable individuals within our community, or they're going to have to take some kind of financing, some kind of loan to bridge that gap in state funding. And that means they're going to have to pay interest costs, and that money is going to be going towards interest on a loan as opposed to the services for our community. So we've been working with the governor for months to try and get a proposal. He has not come off of his initial position, and I say it's not much of a negotiation if you're not willing to compromise. And we haven't seen any compromise from the governor yet. So again, we're going to pass a budget on time, focused on our priorities, balanced, and hopefully he'll take us up on that offer.
You bring up an interesting point in regards to the governor's proposed budget. If you're watching the news, reading the paper, some people at the budget table have said that House Republicans are unwilling to negotiate or look at things in a reasonable manner. However, we know that's not the fact, because it was just a few weeks ago that House Republicans put the governor's tax package up for a vote in the House as he wanted it, and as he said many times before, with a holistic approach. What happened?
Sure. So, this is, again, it's all part of the negotiation process. I understand that. But the governor has been dead set on his proposal. And so that came up for a vote in the State House. And he was interested in having his spending plan voted on, which would provide money for schools and education and all the other things we do in state government. And that's an interesting proposal that I think I share many of his priorities. But at the same time, you need to fund all of that. And the way that you fund all of those programs and all of that spending is by our tax code, and raising taxes is the governor's solution. And so we put his tax plan up for a vote in the House, and not a single member, Republican or Democrat, voted for the governor's tax plan to fund his increases in spending. And so right there, that tells you that we would be out of balance. We have a requirement here in Pennsylvania that you have a balanced budget. So if you don't have the money available for that level of spending, you really need to come up with a new plan. And the governor wouldn't back down from his plan, and so that's where, again, in the legislature, we're coming up with our own proposal, which we are going to put on his desk by June 30th. And so that's, again, a decision that he made to stick with his package that he initially offered and not make any compromises or changes throughout the negotiations, which have been spanning months. And so that puts us in the place we are right now.
And after that vote, after receiving, as you said, not a single vote, not even from his own fellow Democrats in the House, he claims that this was a dog and pony show. It was tricks. Is that accurate?
Well, it's not accurate, and the reason I say it's not accurate is because it's his exact plan. And I think the political trick that was being played, if there was one, is that the governor and Democrats didn't even introduce his proposal. They wanted to talk about this plan and say that this is what they stand for and this is where they are, but yet never introduce it as an actual piece of legislation. And so when they kept saying that that's what they wanted over and over again, it was actually a Republican member who drafted that word for word as they had proposed it and put it into legal language, into a bill form, and introduced that and put it out there. And so again, if you're not going to stand behind what you're proposing and actually move it through the legislative process, to me, that's a political game. I think that we all, as elected officials, have to say what we believe in, stand up for it, and when it comes time to vote on it in the legislative process, you need to be able to back that up.
One issue that the Governor Wolf has been hitting hard is that his budget plan is going to lower property taxes, and that is a major issue here in Pennsylvania. It's a major issue for you back home. Where do you stand on that, that claim?
Yeah, so, absolutely, property taxes are a huge issue in my area. I've routinely voted for legislation that would help reduce property taxes, even eliminate property taxes in some cases. And what the governor has put forward is a proposal whereby you're shifting dollars, so he wants to increase the sales and the income tax and use some of that money, and that's a key provision, some of that money, to reduce property taxes. The net effect, though, is that it's a tax increase because he doesn't use all of that money to reduce property taxes. He wants to use it to increase spending to the tune of $4.7 billion. And again, as was mentioned, that's a 16% increase in spending. And again, since we have a balanced budget requirement, that's a corresponding 16% increase in our taxes. So again, I share a lot of his priorities. I think he's on the right track, but then he kind of loses me by really socking it to the taxpayers.
It's a lot easier to want to spend the money than it is to find the money to spend, essentially.
Absolutely.
Moving on to education, the House recently passed House Bill 805. Can you tell us a little bit about that bill and why it was important to get that done?
Sure. So House Bill 805 deals with how economic furloughs are handled in our school districts. And obviously, we never want to see economic furloughs. We want to make sure that our teachers are in the classrooms teaching. But there are instances where maybe you're in a declining population area, your tax revenues are down, and therefore you might actually have to lay off teachers because you have less students in the classrooms. So there are examples where this could occur in a normal course of business for a school district. And so when that decision comes, currently, the decision of who to lay off is based purely on teacher seniority. So as you mentioned, last in, first out is the system. It's also known as LIFO. It's an acronym there. And so last in, first out means that the most junior teachers, the newest teachers, would be the first to be let go. And so that's really rather arbitrary in the sense that younger teachers may be better, they may be worse, we don't know. But you're basing that decision on how long somebody's been there, not exactly if they were the best teacher or the one who is teaching their students the best. And so House Bill 805 changes that dynamic and says when there are economic furlough decisions to be made, that the decisions would be based on teacher evaluations. And so there's been a new teacher evaluation system that was put in place here in the Commonwealth. About 50% of it is based on the actual evaluation that's done in a classroom by a member of the school district administration. And then the other 50% of their evaluation is done based on a 3-year average of test scores and student growth and performance on those tests, how their building overall is doing. We want teachers working together and collaborating towards a student, their education. And so all of these things go into a teacher evaluation system. The teacher evaluation was voted on a number of years ago here in the House. It actually just went into effect recently, though, and we're seeing that first round of data coming out for teachers, and we're seeing that an overwhelming majority of teachers are performing well. That's what we want to see, but at the same time, it does differentiate and put those teachers into different categories, and if they're unsatisfactory, they would be the first to be considered for an economic furlough, regardless of their seniority. And then seniority, because some people like that, would still be used in a tiebreaker situation. So if somebody is performing at the same level as another person and they're both being considered to be furloughed, then seniority would be the tiebreaker there. And so that's a system that, again, brings more fairness, and really the evaluations are something that was worked out by a broad number of stakeholders in the education community, teachers unions, and also administrations, school boards. Lots of stakeholders weighed in on that process. It was something that passed through the General Assembly, had strong bipartisan support, and so now they would be used for economic furlough decisions.
Now, there were some people that raised the issue that they were concerned that this new legislation could be used to trim the payroll by getting rid of the more senior teachers that have a higher yearly income through the school district and higher benefits cost. Is that something that could happen, or are there safeguards in place?
So no, that could not happen, and it is specifically addressed in the legislation that that's prohibited in the process of evaluating teachers, is to take into account their pay or their benefits or anything like that. So the level of compensation is not a factor, and again, that activity would be prohibited, basing that information or using that information in a furlough decision.
We only have about a minute left, but I want to touch on the new school funding formula that came out of the Basic Education Funding Commission. You're a big proponent of establishing a new school formula for funding. What did the commission recommend, and where do we go from here?
Yeah, so as far as basic education funding in our Commonwealth goes, I think it is very important that we have a funding formula. We're one of only 3 states in the country that does not have a funding formula currently in place. And so really, a lot of times the money goes out based on political will and whims at the time of budget crafting here in Harrisburg. And so I don't think that's a good system. I think we need to get to a formula where it's fair, it's accurate, everybody can see how that money is projected to go out every year. And so there was a piece of legislation which we in the legislature passed, and that would establish a commission to come up with this formula. It's a very complicated process. They held extensive meetings all across the state. And so they came back just with their recommendation recently, and it spells out all of the different variables that would be included in the way that we would fund basic education. So poverty is certainly a driving factor in student education. That would be factored into it, and students or school districts with more students in poverty would receive more money. Small school districts, lots of other factors go into it. And I do think it provides a fairer system of putting out money for our local school districts across the Commonwealth. So really, I think the bigger questions now are around whether that just applies to new money or existing money and how it goes out. So I think we're very close to getting to a resolution on that point, though.
All right, Representative Mackenzie, again, thank you for taking some time. I know it's, as we talked about, busy time of the year. A few more days left until the June 30th deadline, and looking forward to hear more updates from you in the upcoming days on the budget process.
Great. Thank you, Anthony.
That's all the time we have for today's program. If you have comments or questions about this or any other legislative topic, Representative Mackenzie's contact information will be on the screen in a few moments. Thanks for spending a few minutes with State Representative Ryan Mackenzie.